By the time the winter rains came, the roads between Savannah and the South Carolina border had turned to black gumbo, and every wagon wheel left a deep wound in the earth. Eli Barlow had spent 3 days mending harnesses for men in blue, and from the door of his little smithy he watched them pass in long, ragged columns, their coats stiff with mud, their muskets wrapped in oilcloth, their faces grey beneath campaign caps gone shiny at the seams. Behind them rolled the army's hard-earned plunder, wagons, captured guns, and mules with ribs showing through their hides. He had not seen so many soldiers since Sherman's people came through Georgia the year before, and even then the company had felt different now. They moved with a confidence that unsettled the towns they entered, as if the war itself had shifted north with them and South Carolina had been chosen to bear the next weight of it. "Can you mend this by morning?" one cavalryman asked, dropping a broken trace chain onto Eli's anvil. "If the iron holds," Eli said, "it'll hold, everything else has to." The man tried to grin, but the smile died when a distant thump rolled through the damp air. Cannon, far off towards the river road. Eli glanced east. A fog hung low over the pines, whitening the fields and making the world seem smaller than it was. Somewhere beyond that veil, other men were digging, marching, cursing, fighting over ground that had already been trampled by too many boots to bear any more pride. By early February, the talk in town changed from rumor to fact. Sherman's army had crossed into South Carolina. The fear that had followed it from Georgia now arrived ahead of it, riding in every whispered warning from planters' houses and roadside farms. The fields would be stripped, the barns burned, the rail lines torn up. Eli heard all of it in the marketplace while he traded for cornmeal and salt pork. He heard, too, the bitter reply of freedmen moving with the army, and the wary silence of white families who had thought the war might spare them if they kept their heads down. But war did not spare. On a grey morning, Eli took his tools and followed the road a mile beyond town, where the army was working the railroad. Men in blue stood in a long row along the track, levering at the iron with fence rails and crowbars. Once the spikes were pried free, they set the rails upon hot fires built from ties and timbers, then twisted the softened metal around tree trunks until it bent like ribbon. Eli had seen it done before in Georgia, but the sight still struck him with a strange, sick fascination. The rails, meant for carrying cotton and passengers and news, were being turned into useless curls of black iron under a sky the color of lead. A lieutenant noticed him watching and called out, "You there? Can you handle a hammer?" Eli wiped his hands on his coat and came forward. "If you need a man for iron, I can manage it." "Good," the officer said. "We've broken enough of their road to matter. Let's make certain they don't mend it quick." So Eli spent the day at the fire, beating red-hot rail ends with the others, helping twist the pieces into useless spirals before they cooled. The heat bit through his sleeves, and smoke stung his eyes. Around him men joked in tired voices, but there was little joy in the work. It was labor meant to cripple a country. Every turn of the rail seemed to carry a promise of more hunger, more delay, more broken families waiting on trains that would never come. Near dusk, while they worked, a column of refugees passed along the lane beyond the tracks, 2 women in shawls, an old man with a cane, 3 children walking barefoot in the mud. One child stared at the army's fires as if they were a festival. One of the women glanced at the twisted rails and crossed herself. Eli looked away first. The campaign pushed on through Columbia and beyond, and stories came back to him in scraps. Warehouses opened and emptied, bridges fired, troops living off the country as they marched. The city of Columbia burning in the confusion of a night wind and enemy guns. No one in the tavern could agree on how much had been intentional and how much the work of chaos, but all of them knew what it meant to lose a city to flames. In every house, there were the same old fears, not just of the Yankees, but of what war taught men to excuse. Then, as the month turned toward March, word spread that the army had crossed into North Carolina. The men who came through now were thinner, more ragged, their uniforms patched with whatever cloth could be found. Yet their officers kept them moving, and the army still seemed to flow like a great dark river through the pine barrens and swamp roads, cutting away the last support of the Confederacy in the Carolinas. Eli heard from a teamster that at Bentonville there had been another hard fight, the kind that left fields churned to paste and wounded men lying in rows under blankets. He heard that Johnston had struck Sherman there and that the Federals had held. The names meant little to the women queuing for meal or the children gathering splinters for firewood, but the outcome mattered all the same. Every battle now seemed only to shorten the distance to surrender. One wet evening, after he had shut the smithy, Eli found a private sitting on the step outside, head bowed, boots caked with red clay. The man's coat was torn at the shoulder, and one sleeve had been crudely stitched. "Lost your regiment?" Eli asked. "Lost track of it," the private said. "They've been marching so long I reckon the road owns us now." Eli set a tin cup of water beside him. The soldier drank, then held the cup in both hands as if warming them. "You from here?" the man asked. "From the county," Eli said. "Never thought the war would come back this way so hard." "It came everywhere else first," the private said, and gave a tired breath that might have been a laugh. "A man starts believing the map is the whole world. Then the army marches over it and tells him different." Eli looked at the road, at the churned mud and broken fence rails, at the marchers moving in the dusk like shadows with muskets. He thought of the twisted iron by the tracks, of the blackened timbers, of women carrying children away from homes they would find changed or gone. He thought of how a war could pass through a place and leave it standing, and yet not leave it the same. At dawn the next day the army moved again, south and then east, toward the coast where surrender and final ruin were already gathering. The men went in long files through the mist, their packs swaying, their bayonets catching pale light when the clouds broke. Eli watched until the last wagon disappeared among the pines. Then he went back to his forge, set a bar of iron in the coals, and listened to the bellows breathe. The country would have to be rebuilt one piece at a time. He did not know who would be left to do it, or under what flag, or with what memories. He only knew that the rails lay twisted in the fields, the roads were bruised by wheels, and the people who remained would measure time now by marches and burnings and the slow end of an army that had crossed 2 states like a storm.